This is so awesome. I love this format and this context. And I also want to say that I really love Malvern books, and to thank Joe and everyone who works here. Because this is an amazing place. Poetry doesn't usually have a house. It's usually pretty homeless and destitute. But this is a very beautiful house for poetry. And thank you all for coming tonight. Let's see, what did you ask for? Stamens. Okay, I'll start with Stamens because it's the oldest poem. And I'll tell you something nice about this. Just last week, the poet Leslie Newman was in town, and she also has a book that came out by Headmistress, so we met up. Leslie wrote a book of poems about Matthew Shepard, and Conspirare, Craig Hella Johnson's choir here in Austin, has created a choral experience about Matthew Shepard, and it premiered last weekend. So Leslie was in town and her poems were used, and we got together and we went out to Corona Coffee. And the proprietor of Corona Coffee was so in love with the idea that we were poets that he made us these incredibly fanciful drinks. And he sprinkled saffron, which is crocus stamens, all over my chai. And then I was outside with Leslie, and she opened my book, and the first poem is called Stamens. So she said, we have to give him a copy of this book. So we brought the books in, and we bartered for the coffee with the poetry, all by the word stamen. So this is actually probably one of the sadder poems I've written. Oh, but it has a nice ending. Okay, Stamens. I walked along lugubrious in winter, trod my map of icy poverty, detoured into a church parking lot where a rat gnawed on some phone wire and eyed me. The Prez got the Nobel Prize today. I called a few friends, no one was home. I stepped over and avoided a flattened opossum. I stopped in the church garden to feel the moon and found a topless tin trash can full of white lilies blooming. The slap of boudoir lemon musk. I stripped the yellow leaves, gathered the blossoms, the long stems and their pollinated tongues, and exalted walked on under the stars and electric wires, transformed by turnaround, no longer alone. I found a casita, bright orange with a fence made of bicycle wheels, overlapping like exploding Venn diagrams. It all said, artist lives here. So I knocked, 9 p.m. A woman stuck her head out and I said, free flower delivery. I found these in a trash can, it's maybe 20 lilies, and she bust out laughing without suspicion, came out, accepted the armful riot, hugged me, and as she closed the gate, yelled out, what joy.
That's for sad.
That actually happened. Oh no, it was a sad beginning. But I always remember how I felt when I started writing the poem. That was sad. But yeah, I know, it turned out well. That actually happened. That house is on Neal Street in the Go Valley neighborhood.
All right.
Okay. Okay, so another one I'll read from from Ammonite. It's called Anniversary. And I read this one to just to say, like, poets are deeply flawed, including myself. Anniversary. I shoplifted every day in New Orleans for 15 years, until one quick arrest in Saks Fifth Avenue. At least she has good taste, the booking officer said, as she stripped me down, confiscated the stuffed walrus, the satin nightgown, tall girl brand, the coral, amethyst, and lapis rings from my inner pockets. My specialty at the time was confusing salesgirls with countertop romance, while objects gunned down my shirt sleeves. It was a high school girl's economy. Decades of small merchandise attached to my torso while my fingers were hidden, twiddling in their anti-gravity magnetism. Yes, I was bursting with nurturance for semi-sentient objects. Currently, I only crave botanical nubs where leaves and buds sprout off stems or bulbs let loose roots down into dirt. I promised myself I won't dig up the past, nor will I unplant agave and aloe from the university landscaping and plant them in my front yard. Mulched now with leather purses and that marsupial coat whose pockets delivered merchandise straight to the hem. I won't cut entire branches, just excess edges, the trailing vine leaning out to make contact with the air in the park. My pockets are rich with these snips of yellow rose, juniper bush, and linden, with seedlings to initiate climbing, to imagine a lattice behind which no one can see us as we imitate and try for life. We dip ourselves in rooting powder so spores surge out of the smallest pores. And without stealing now, my body fills with whirls of greenery, strange honesty, love, and plucked slight twigs of quince. So I have had a really particularly hard time publishing poetry with queer content. Also, I think I write a lot of poems about child abuse and family violence and various forms of both personal and structural violence against women and girls. And those are just hard poems to publish. So anyway, this poem is called Algerian Funeral, and it's in honor of a young friend I had who took his own life. Algerian Funeral. The month before he jumped into the frigid sea, his mother screamed she had no son. She'd rather he be dead than gay. Having no words of my own to offer, the mother of my perfect friend, who saw the cosmos as a feathery bed where he and other boys could roundly rapture, I opened the miniature French to English dictionary anywhere. Né, born. Néanmoins, nevertheless. Néant, nothing. Born, nevertheless, nothing. I tore out the page, handed it to her. I don't know what it said on the other side. My friend was certain that children create their parents with brushes and pots of watercolor, and if your parents are ugly, it's because you can't paint well enough. He said, "Don't cry, mon chéri. You just have to practice. Mix the palette, angle your brushstroke, and add the water droplets again." And that's for Adil Idris. I'll read the one that you requested, Don't Decide to Die Without Consulting Me. It kind of follows the other poem because in some ways I wrote it for that friend. I actually wrote it right at the time when the epidemic of suicide of LGBT, particularly teenagers, was kind of rising up and surfacing into public understanding. Which was 2010, when it first started being reported in the news and all over. It started being reported in the national news and sort of kicked off with the story of Tyler Clementi. So at that time it was all rising up, and I started a project where that resulted in the book that Joe mentioned in my biography called Curry with Advice for Educators, How to Respect and Protect Your LGBTQ Students. So I interviewed mostly via Skype LGBTQ students in elementary school, middle school, and high school for 6 months, and then using their voices crafted 14 sort of points and themes that were things that they wanted educators to understand about how to treat them in school. So at the same time that was happening, there were just more and more kids taking their lives. It's an extremely big no-no to publish one poem in two places, and I forgot that this poem had been already published in this book, because I don't associate it with this book, which I associate with Hurricane Katrina. But to my shock and horror, the same poem is in both, so you will get it double if you want it. Don't decide to die without consulting me, for queer youth everywhere. So yes, some young activists, artists, and queers lose relatives in layers, and sometimes walk around naked from stair to stair. First, grandparents resist, then uncles and fathers fade. Siblings cease to radio in. Mothers fumble, anthills rise over roads home. But lily, lady, lad, lass, listen. The radio of love is on. You're live. Don't go silent yet. We can fix any emergency. You can cocoon, rewrite the rules, fuck indiscriminately, sob or strip in class, but please don't decide to die without consulting me. Please inform your friends and deities, read runes, let us feed you whipped cream and berries on a silver baby spoon. Try a change of latitude, charter a unicorn, style your hair with new warrior attitude, and remember that in every country, laundromat, cafe, hamlet, cell, or paradise on earth, someone wonderful, someone gorgeous and honest is probably waiting nearby, idly reading the funnies, their heart filled with peonies, their thumbs hooked in belt loops, waiting with a big mysterious smile to welcome you home. Thanks for requesting that one.
Of course.
Oh, Equality Hymn Wanted. Okay, this is the one I've never read out loud. And there's a friend in the room who really helped me with this out, so to her I give thanks. Equality Hymn. God, I adore women whose bodies spill, stretch, round out, roll, yield, wall, expand, fold, more body than I can grab onto with my hands or mouth. Oh yes, to have a very fat lover is heaven to me. I want her reading in my bed extravagantly at any hour. It helps me survive. Lying face down on my fat woman's body is floating on soft perpetual truths. And when we sleep, my face will find her breast, my hands tuck in, legs grip her hips. To anchor our ardor, we're always accidentally, tantrically rubbing up, tangential to anything. We love to touch each other. In the ordinary starving world, I see no one diving for the Mons Venus of big, wild, angry women, but to lift a mountain breast with both my hands is bliss. Looking at my lover, some people whisper, she's not healthy. Something is wrong with her self-esteem. We adore herself lavishly. They'd say, what do you see in her? She's so pretty. I see power, divinity. Obese. Please. You're going to die too, and you won't have been living in a landscape of rippling wonder, unraveling detractors, and throwing off flowers at every touch. It's strange to read to a silent audience. What was the other one, Joe? Was that all of that? That was all of them. Okay, great, cool. Let's see if there's any more that I want to read. This chapbook literally just came out, so I have read almost none of them out loud. I'll read two more. I'll read three more. This one is called Dash, and if you have read the poetry of Emily Dickinson, of course you know that she obsessively uses this long dash between her phrases and at the end of her stanzas and at the end of her lines. She basically was obsessed with this one element of punctuation and used it to the exclusion of almost all others. And I read that as just a very specific claiming of her own language and making of her own language. There was no room for her in the world at the time when she was writing. And she could get no attention, she could get no respect, and so she was like, fine. And she shut the door, and she did it all on her own. So I find the dash to be particularly like rich with like intimacy and power that I think of as from a very like hidden time. And if you don't know about Emily Dickinson's lesbianism, you should check out the book called Open Me Carefully, Emily Dickinson's love letters to her sister-in-law, Susan Huntington Dickinson, because they carried on a 30-year passionate affair. And many of Emily's poems were actually begun in letters to Susan. So this starts with a quote from one of her letters, "And I do love to run fast and hide away from them all here in dear Susie's bosom." Oh, Emily D., you knew riding the dash was like lashing one log to the next, a river raft for feeling. The dash was like lying down on a blanket in the field with Susan, time stealing, kissing, tinkering with iambics, and tickling her with your feet. The dash was joining everything equally in one long breath, in the transport of her bud. Another line from the letters. This dash let you keep writing and talking while part of you slipped away planning a black cake with a folded note sent down to her in your pulley and basket, a lavender borage and parsley bouquet embroidered on her handkerchief. A long silence before a night unveiling, tracing, taking off your white linen dress, in a rainstorm, her hand in heat lightning, lacing up your naked back. And here's a final stanza, which is from her letters. Title divine is mine. I am your wife without the sign. So, Emily. Okay. Think about what I want to end with. I'll read this. The title poem. I mean, the first poem in the book is a concrete poem, which a concrete poem refers to a poetic form in which you use the shape of the words on the page to say something more about your subject, or to mirror your subject. So I won't show you this yet because it'll give the poem away, but sure, it's a concrete poem. Arrival. At 12, I became an astronaut reaching out with huge gloved hands and red tunnel vision toward the moon. The completely full moon. The whole moon with no end in sight. The round, abandoned moon. The voluminous, milky moon. The powder keg, blind crater, volcano, jumping with cows moon. I was hungry for the whole, cold, distant, unreliable moon, moon without flag, my longed-for, luscious, silk-lined moon, my unattainable, faithful, private moon, moon without man, tidal, hovering, mercurial, tender, trusting moon, the menstrual dream dial moon. I lumbered toward it night after night in the puffy white suit, hearing the roar of my own secret, heavy breathing, my eyes smarting, embarrassed and flailing, until suddenly, floating, pulsing, unable to rest or breathe or land, in one movement I reached out and found it, a live breast in my hand. It was fun making that happen. The publisher, it took me a long time to get it into this shape, and because the publisher wanted to publish it going this way. So you'd open the book and then you'd have to turn it like that, and I was like, this is going to set up an expectation that I can't fulfill throughout the book. So one of the great things about having a publisher who cares about you, which is often the case when you're doing a small poetry press, is that they'll work with you as an editor. So we probably went back 20 different times back and forth about that poem. And so poetry, any poem worth its salt, and really any collection of poems, is the work of so many people, so many hands. And there's quite a few people in this room who had their hands in this book, so thank you. Let me think about one to end with. Okay, I'll read one called Thesis Defense, which kind of speaks to what Joe was referring to about like the bigger world of poetry being kind of parsimonious and disconnected. Sometimes you just have to bump up against that. Thesis Defense. You need to choose between using your ands or using your ampersands, he said at the final critique and climactic finale of our 3 funded years together. It's like being good at embroidery. You don't want anyone to see the messy stitches. I fingered my hem, stuttered, but aren't and ampersand 2 different words with different bodies? Do you guys know what the ampersand is? It's the little curly and sign. Okay, but aren't and ampersand 2 different words with different bodies? And is dependable, a workhorse. It strides upright and humble, offers androgynous, quiet support. Ampersand, on the other hand, lounges in deep cleavage, strolls and fucks loudly. She holds each arm out for lost words to grab onto. And can be a perfect, solid brass safety pin, but badass bitches like ampersand are never invisible stitches.